Following that sparkling introduction, Garnet obviously jumped up on all the highlights of my life, so it was fairly brief. Of course, I was hoping, being booked here by Don McLean, that we'd get a starry night, but it's actually pissing with rain. I'm going to fall over this. Right, so a few apologies. I've been a bit poorly for the last couple of years, and if you find I'm wandering about or forgetting what I'm saying, it's all it's difficult to separate sometimes being here from just getting old. There we go. Right, so right. Let's talk. Well, after all the technical jiggery pokery that went on, let's see if we can do something. Right. Because I put together a special Burt Branch talk, which is extra long. So I mean, the last time I was here, it was the national AGM, so I hope tonight will be even more interesting than that. I can always press the wrong buttons and things. Right, now, as some of you will know, I tended to do things on 3 wheels. Now here I am. This is 1947, 48. My first episode on 3 wheels. Am I going to be in the way?
You get reliant Robin after it.
So yes, so there I am. And of course, having found how unstable 3 wheels are, I moved on to a 2-wheeler. Look at that! Now look at those trousers and that hanky and the Clark's shoes. Some of you people are old enough to remember these things. I'm not sure what I've got on my head. It's a sort of junior crashing on or something. Anyway, so yes, we've been around bikes for a bit. So then we eventually got our own bike. There used to be a group of 6 of us used to go around to rallies and all the events. We all had 350s, Velocette, Aerials, etc. And it's me with the beard, and the lady down right at the front is my dear wife, and she's put up with me now for 55 years. There's at least 10 happy years in that. Right, and then eventually we got to Trommer. After school, where I'd managed to get an A level, I went to work for a W&T Avery at Smethwick, which was it was quite a shop. It was one of the Bolton and Watts old original foundries. We learned the tunnels underneath where they hit the Luddites and etc. So when I tried to move to Triumph, the fact they put me onto an RMC course, which seemed rather easy, he said modestly. When I went for interview at Triumph, my lowest exam mark was 93%, which got me straight in. Not because I was clever, just because it was of the course. So I was the first sandwich apprentice that they took on, 6 months at the factory, 6 months at college. It was now Coventry University, the way things get degraded, but it was named after the great Lanchester Coventry man. So we ended up Triumph, 6 months about factory and college. And 6 months about I went to a lot of different departments, from rough casting. I mean, remember the factory making a thick end of 1,000 bikes most week, 1,800 workers, lots of stuff done in-house. So I go around as an apprentice, rough stores, things like plating. We were always very proud of our chrome plating. So I've done a bit, of course you didn't, like you do now, you buy pre-gritted wheels of various grit, but then people like me as an apprentice, you had a long, narrow plywood box with the grit at the bottom, and then next to you was a steaming cauldron of glue, and you had the wheels just made from discs of cotton put together. You had to put the glue on and then roll them up and down in this box. But it was very handy when I was sort of racing if you wanted rockers lined and polished and things of that sort of nature. Triumph always helped out even though they didn't know it. Right, so that's the assembly track, and then we make it 1,000 bikes a week, so 200 a day. So they'd be whizzing down there. You can see what year they are. It's a splayed head, Bonneville fin rocker boxes, so 1969-ish. These were fed at right angles, but the sub-assemblies were put together, so the cylinder heads, the gearbox internals, all these parts fed in. One of the tricky jobs was the old boy, whose name I'm trying. You'll have to excuse me for forgetting things. Lovely old boy had to put the cast iron barrels on to those HG10 rings, which were very brittle, and tricky job to make. You know, when you're doing 200 a day, 400 rings times 2, the compression ratio, the rings are very easy to break. And Jack, what's his name? Can't remember. Ceremonially, every Friday afternoon at the end of play, he always used to wipe the pistons with a piece of velvet, anti-static, this bit of velvet used to be ceremoniously washed, cleaned, and run out and hung up to dry for Monday morning. We didn't build engines, although for a lot of us 6.5 days was a standard week. None of this bloody rubbish we get today when you work in half time. And I was reading a piece in the paper the other day about an old boy who said, after work on Saturday morning, we used to go straight to the pub and then go and watch the football. It was brilliant. Now I'm at home Saturday morning, I'm too afraid to ask the wife if I can put the football on the television. And interesting enough, of course, you all, when you were not doing the non-manual stuff, working in the offices, it was suit and tie all the time. But on Saturday morning, you could wear a sports jacket. People forget this. Right, so that's the engine track. Here's the bikes being put together on the bike track. These are triples. Disc brakes are TR50, so late 72, 73 models, and great skill. The wheel over and the picture on the left are where the wheel. I think virtually all the wheel builders were female. Generally because they're brighter. Build something that's round and true, and because the next tricky job to go and put in 400 tyres on a day. That was some job, especially the rear ones with 2 security bolts. They had little U-shaped bits of steel that when you've got, with the tyre levers, long levers they're using, you put this on, and so you went to the other side, it didn't slip back off, which is the bane of all our lives. Those little U-shaped things are very good. And of course, everybody was on piecework. Avery, when I was there before, the typical guys there were getting £20 a week. This is 1963. Triumph was the highest paid place in Coventry, which is the highest paid place in the UK. And you did see pay packets of £100 a week in 1964. And of course in the development shop, which split into racing and road, the guys involved with preparing the race bikes were always known as the racing bastards, because they're the ones who got all the overtime and the extra pay, double money on Sundays and all this stuff. Now, of course, all the parts of the bike were all drawn beautifully in the correct way with chisel point pencils, all except exhaust pipes, which were so difficult, three-dimensional bends. And of course, different batches of steel spring back. You need different tooling for each diameter of pipe and each radius of bend, so it's a lot of equipment. But because one spring back more than the other, you had on the track. So it always made me laugh when I was making Toga exhaust pipes. You get some old boy, could be one of you guys, on the phone saying, this part doesn't quite fit, it hangs down a bit at the end. I've had the bike from you, the standard one was perfect, what's going on? Because they hadn't seen that one of the guys who had the fork stanchion, that he put up the end of it, and at the front end, the guy with a bloody right rubber mallet, melting out of the top bend. And then he thought everything's perfect, and he arrives at the customer. So yes, I went in all departments, and the one that appealed to me most was the development, racing, the experimental, which really appealed. And of course, I've been doing a little bit of sprint racing myself. So when I went to see Doug Heel, who you might be seeing, no, not yet, right. Just before that, this is the frame welding, as you can see. Big change. This is 1970-71. Because before then, you had malleable iron lugs brazed, sweated onto the tubes, and because we changed to this all welded jobbie with, you can see the big top tube that helped to bankrupt the factory, because nobody realised when the bikes came off the track. Well, when I started, every finished bike was taken on the road by a tester. The testers were stunning, and they used to do silly tricks like, you see, what you could do and not fall off on a new bike. I can remember one of the guys down on the American Mile, they had about 6 testers on each side, and then this guy decided, he'd been in the Royal Signals, that he could stand on the seat and drive past them all to show off. Well, of course, the old seats are a bit, the army, everything's bolted down, but a new seat can be a bit, so he came off in a big one to make it. Anyway, so that was, of course, in the winter time, that wasn't too clever for bikes that were going to be packed up and sent around the world. So we eventually got dynos in, and they had targets for power and torque. And if they didn't reach it, the ignition timing would be checked, and then topic gaps checked, and if they still couldn't find out work short of power, the head would have to come off, and of course with big diameter tube, the head bolts wouldn't come out. Result, factory stopped for getting on for 3 months, lost the whole season in America, and that's why you end up, those of you guys who got T140s, why you have one bolt going into another one because of the tubes. And the other silly thing about the tube is, of course, you're carrying less oil than the 650s used to, because originally the filler was back of the headstock, right at the top. Because some of the testers who brake more ferociously than the average man were getting oil coming out, and they needed some baffles in it, and there wasn't time, so it came into production with a new filler at the bottom of the bed, the top of the vertical part, and it stayed that way out, so nobody bothered to alter it. So that was a cock up. There's the great man. What a guy. Absolutely. He could, he was clever enough, I mean, he could lay out his camshafts, which is basically differentiation, differences and all the rest of it. And he spent a week just with a pencil, drawing board and a bit of paper. But on the other hand, he could roll his sleeves up and get file and saw out and do stuff. Trip man. And he had us all eating out of his hands. And he was rarely wrong. Great man. Anyways, yeah. when I went for interview with him and showed him what I'd built to go sprinting on, thinking that would make him impressed, and he said, "You'll spend all your time thinking about your own bikes." Oh, no sir, no. So I managed to bluff my way in. There's Doug as a nipper. You might see he had his club footings, his big boot over the side. And he was always keen on exercises, and because he'd ride bikes every day. I mean, this is a guy who would go from Meriden to Birmingham and back, all round, whatever the weather was, and he would sleep with a pencil and paper by his bed and come up with different sort of ideas in the middle of the night to some of us. I can remember him talking to me one morning and saying he was doing the washing up and watched the water going down the plug hole and had an idea for a Venturi out of car. And whenever he arrived in the experimental, he knew what all the guys, we're talking about 15 guys, something like that, he knew exactly what everybody was doing. And he always had his special, his kit. He used to have a jet helmet, goggles, and a little bit of fur, and a visor, and then he'd have hoops cut out of inner tube around his sleeves to stop his arms flapping when he was going quick. But he could never stop. He was so bursting with enthusiasm, he'd take his hat off and then he'd go and see somebody and say this and this, and then dash off and round and he'd take his jacket off, because this all went on for years, because it was one day Bert Hopwood secretary caught him down there without his trousers on. So after that he had to go up to his office to get his kit on. But it was terrific how he knew exactly what was going on, what everybody was doing. Right, so we've moved briefly on talking about what we were doing, a bit of racing. That is the only VSA rocket. Remember, all the triple, some were raced under the VSA brand, but they're all built by us at Meriden. That's a fine looking bike. We only did the one, I have no idea where it is now. You can see it's got the big Fontana brake. And there are a few here professional pictures. That's John Cooper's bike that won the race of the year. And you can see the rear master cylinder has a big tube of brake fluid on the top of it. That's to make sure, because we thought the volume was so small, and with the vibration you could get air balls in and lose your brakes. That one I think is Percy's bike. We noticed the rear sprocket on that one is suitably light, and this one is obviously, because again, unlike today where they turn up into a mobile village, we would go practice on a circuit. So if we were in Mallory Park, we'd go on a Friday afternoon, practice, sort everything out, only leaving jetting and sprockets to be changed on race day if the wind was in a different direction or it was raining or whatever. So because the department had a transit van, and if it was a big race meeting and we were taking 3 or 4 bikes, we would hire another van, and that was it. And then you put the 2 vans side by side, bikes in the middle, piece of string across the end, because everybody's allowed in the paddock then, because we were all decent people and didn't go off stealing things. So, Doug was fanatical about rubber mounting. I don't think in all the racing we did, we never ever had a failure through a crack or a break caused by like a rubber mounting. But I mean, he'd never let go of so. I mean, see the coils there, there's 2 this side and 1 the other. I think Dean Arthur Jakeman, who was doing, had to make 5 different sets before Doug was happy with it. That's how he was. And the same sort of thing with the 3-into-1. I mentioned that because up till then, all bikes had a separate megaphone for each cylinder. And when we put the first triple engine on the test bed, with 3 megaphones, it came in with more, about 50, just over 50 horsepower, the same as a Manx Norton was going out with. So it was determined that it couldn't really ride this. So we approached Brabham, who let us have a flat 3-into-1 collector off one of their 6-cylinder cars. And we were so impressed with that then Doug set to work to design the 120-degree one. And there's quite a bit in that when you look at what you're trying to do with the gases. The internal volume, it's going to come out of the pipe, expand, but then it's going to go back into the front of the megaphone. How much overlap you've got, and the angle, there's a lot to it. And basically, with 3-into-1, you could drive that up the high street. So incredibly flexible. But again, Doug would come in every morning and say to us, because all the exhaust pipes are all cut and shot, welded, standard things, no fancy things like a bender. They're all handmade. And Doug said, right, I think I've got an idea. I want to get this in, really tucked in like here and there. The next morning he'd come back after I'd been sweating away, welding stuff up, and say, you're going the right direction, but it just needs another little bit there and a bit there. So then sort of on the Wednesday he'd come back again. You're almost thinking, you're really doing well, but I think you'll chuck that away and get it there and there. And you ended up with an exasperated fitter, but he always explained what he was doing, and he would never ever go half measures, and he would never worry about upsetting anybody, because we all knew he was always right. When you've got a boss who doesn't know what he's talking about, but insists he was always right, you're in trouble. But the great Doug was, and if you came up with an idea, he would always give you the credit, which doesn't always happen. And we managed to get these bikes getting on towards 85 horsepower and really charging on. Around this period they're winning. That's in the experimental. That's Percy's bike again. We did have a lot of problem. The way these frames, and no, I'll get to that in a minute. So that's a shot in the experimental department. Another production. I was on the homologation committee with the ACU. For production racing, you had these rules. You've got to make at least 100 or 200, I can't remember what it was, available kits. And of course, at Triumph Factory, we would print these lists of parts with prices. But everybody was always out of stock because we didn't want anybody to have it. And because one of the things I had to do, I had to get the rules altered, because the production racing rules say you must use a standard frame. Well, when the triples came out, they were so low, they were dragging on the ground. So, this one, the ACU, right in the middle of London, very reminiscent, stunning, like a giant stately home, rather than being an industrial unit in Rugby. So I managed to get the rules altered to say the frame must be of a standard type. That meant that we could raise the engine an inch or so and go around the corners faster, which is all good stuff. Right, okay, you've probably seen enough of those. Right now, part of the experimental, the comp shop where I worked as an apprentice, where I once told the foot, the gaffer, to go start off and make his own cup of tea, which got me down to the apprentice supervisor, Sharpish. Right, and of course we were very successful both with Tiger Cubs on the UK trials, winning the Scottish 6 days and etc. etc. And of course, great preparation for the International 6 Days trial, which at the time again we expected and generally did win the gold medals. The guys here on the bikes, you've got Johnny Giles, who also scrambled, well, as it was then, motocross, I think till he was 80, which is making me feel slightly embarrassed. But he lost an eye through a stone. And he was really, back in the days when the scrambling was on the TV, he was used to do really well. Then he lost an eye, and what happened then is he started falling off and over really well. People saying, what's happened? He said, well, I get the point with one eye where I can't tell exactly where I am, so I shut off and fall off. And then a couple months later, he started winning again. So what's going on? Well, when I don't know exactly where I am, what's happening, I just bloody nailed it. Right, next one, we've got Roy Peplow, Ray Sayer, and Ken Eames, who ended up with a big dealership. And the bikes we had, 350, 490, and then 504 to get to the bigger capacity. You might recognise some of the guys in the back row. That's the American team. The guy with the T-shirt is Bud Eakin, who did the jump, and Steve McQueen. A lot of the riders said he wasn't half as good at riding as he thought he was. But yeah, I was heavily involved with that, how we put them together. And yeah, we had great. We used to watch the riders practice. I mean, try doing this at home. Right? You're driving on a 6 days trial. You're covered in mud and crap, sweating, trying to keep up to time, and an official jumps out and says, "Stop! Show me your rear inner tube." So you chuck the bike down, let the wind out of the tyre, take the spindle out, find your tyre levers, hold up the inner tube, and then reassemble. The good guys could do that and ride off in 4 minutes. Oh, who's that? That's me. That's me. My dear wife took that. That's wearing, we still call them ganses. Good. My dear mum knitted that. The reason that's there is I borrowed, I'm a 19-year-old apprentice now, so it's a very old picture. And I said, I'm involved in organising the grass track. Could I borrow a nice bike for the weekend? Yeah, take this one. Okay. Be careful with it. It's Steve McQueen's. And I'd forgotten all about that. When I was digging around with my book, I found that, and I sort of remembered that story. So, there's the reg number.
That's you again, is it?
Functions of that, yeah. So not a replica, the real one. And the final bit of the story, I was sprinting a Tiger Cub at the time, so on the way back to the factory on a Monday morning, I had a pair of Tiger Cub flywheels on my barber jacket, and I didn't do the belt up tight enough, and they slipped down and scratched the petrol tank. And as an apprentice, I'm going, oh, don't worry, kid, we should stick another tank on it. Because when you're making 1,000 a week, the size of the spare store and that, I mean, the collar of the petrol tank is the main feature, one of the main features of the bike. And of course, you can always get employee discount if stuff is damaged. So you go on to where they do the tanks and say, I need another tank. What colour do you want to? Red and silver would be nice. We haven't got any scratch ones of those, but don't worry kid, I'll scratch one for you. Right, of course, when Edward Turner did the T21 in, whatever it was, 57, didn't imagine we would end up racing the thing. That's a 66 racer, standard brake, standard front brake, etc. 2 pipes on this side, keep the Americans happy. We'll just go around the left-hand corners. That's the next year. Fontana brake, different pipes, now Grand Prix cars, etc. They've got some big baffles in the petrol tank. And that's outside on the grass outside the factory. And there's the great and lately lamented Ray Pickrell. He was a Cockney father. It was. I can remember accosting an old lady in a supermarket who was picking up a tin of beans and him telling her how they were going to make a fart really bad. I found it rather when we used to go over to South Africa early spring before Daytona to race over there, and Pick was sitting between a young lady and an old man, and he desperately wanted to fart, but he thought it wasn't very appropriate. Anyway, they headed off, and when it got dark and they pulled the blinds down, the old man took his shoes off. So Pick thought, this is an ideal time. So, yeah, he said it was horrible as well. We again bent the rules by getting Ray and Paul Smart, another late lamented, wonderful guy, to race in the Manx Grand Prix, which is only 8 times to riders, but we managed somehow to fiddle it. Big companies do these things. There's again another late lamented, Percy Tate, tester and racer, started racing in the 1940s. Went to his funeral a couple of years ago. That's a prototype Thruxton. Doesn't look a lot like people's impression of what a Thruxton looks like. I mean, the testers, we had 1, 2 or 3 of them in the shop, had to do 200 miles a day. Percy, who was a very entrepreneurial son, with all sorts of activities, like when the troubles were on in Ireland, the cars are very cheap there, so we used to bring lots of them over to England and send lots of motorbikes, because that's what people wanted over there. And because it was a farm, we used to buy and sell cows and pigs and sheep and busy man. So when he came in for his coffee at 10:30 in the morning, he'd already done 150 miles, and therefore it was just transport for the rest of the day then. But a great guy. I mean, some of the tales, you can see the front of the factories on the big road. He'd come whizzing up, park the bike, disappear into the factory, and then 2 minutes later the police car would roll up, and where is he? What do you mean? So it just came in, and we all know how the old bikes go tinkle, tinkle, tinkle when they cool him down. So, like on that bike, and it's like going tinkle, tinkle. And before computers, Percy used to have 3 driving licenses. You know, you'd get 3 endorsements. He had 3 driving licenses and always 2 endorsements on each of it. And yes, used to get stopped by the old bill with the usual speeds in excess of 95. Are you working in the factory, young man? Yes. I've only borrowed it. So if I pinch you, you'll get into trouble, won't you? Yes, officer. Well, tell me what's new about it, and then I'll let you off. Lots of that rigmarole. That's one that's still going, Darrell Pendlebury. Great rider, he's 80 now, going well. That's again a prototype type Thruxton jobby. Now there's interesting how fashion's changed, isn't it? Now that's a big twin. That was the first showing of the new Thruxton. That's the new Thruxton. How it was meant to be. And a little interesting side story from newer times. The Hinckley, the current company, was sued 15 years ago when they started doing branded clothing. They were sued by the German Brazier company, who I think were claiming they were into big twins first. But they came to me and asked if I provide evidence that branded clothing would try and find a bit around, which I did. And then subsequently, when I hope some of you know about the trike I got built for Simon Weston, the Falcons hero. That swung on that clothing thing from 15 years ago, because they said they hadn't got any money. And I said, well, your financial director had a lot of benefit from me with no charge. Maybe he's got a bigger budget. And I got an email from Nick Law saying, we'll give you a 1,200 monitor. It's absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure a lot of you guys helped me to get, we raised another sort of 25 grand. And Simon's like I was going to say a man, dog with two dicks, don't know what, dog with two tails. And he rides round in Build-A-Bear, said, the people on the pavement wave at me when I go past. That's brilliant. What am I? I had 97 operations in 40 years. I had one operation, and he was ringing me up a couple of times to see how I was. It takes a long time to get over these, he said. I know. I said, oh, Simon, this is ironic. You've got 90. When we were doing the trike, because he can't work levers, and then we've got electronic gear change, but his one thumb is one of his big toes. I mean, his whole body is a patchwork. His last operation was having a replacement eyelid, because the one skin they'd taken off his back lost elasticity and he couldn't blink. I mean, what a man. Never, And he does so much work for charity. Unbelievable. Anyway, yes, that young lady ended up going to New York with Edward Turner and things. Right. There's another good old boy, Dave Coxford. He's still going, barking by. Good fine. Here's another one. Sorry. Some of this is a bit higgledy-piggledy. You're right. The Marshall's bikes with Doug, Ron Barrett, known as the Mole Strangler, and his elder brother Alan Barrett, who come from Lucas. Great. He was the foreman, and he was very good, particularly on electrics. Now the Marshalls at TT, enjoying riding brand new free bikes. Yes, Ron used to work on the Marshall's bikes for a good proportion of the year to make sure they were all absolutely spot on. There's the frame for the worked races. Now, that interesting story. Percy Tate was racing. There was a lot of racing on the 500s, which was the classic. Was when he finished second to Agostini at Spa, which was the fastest circuit around. But Percy's thing was how fast he could ride fast corners, because he's used to the bikes getting into tank slab and they just nail it. But he was also some of the British events riding 650, 750 twins and big old things. And he borrowed a couple of frame drawings from the factory and gave them to his chum Rob North, who was working up Colliery Lane at Bedworth, and I had a lot to do with it subsequently. So the first frame had another tube, if you can imagine, running from the front of the swinging arm almost vertically upwards to join the middle of the seat rail. The first frame that Rob did that was like that, and Rob knew what he was doing, but the drawings he'd been given by Percy were so old. I mean, Doug sorted the handling out of the Triumphs by one, locating the swinging arm properly to the frame, and two, by altering the head angle from 65 to 62. So when we were looking at match races, Gary Nixon, who was the top USA guy, tough as nails, said this handler's not right, and that's when we tweaked. The head angle was wrong. So the bike was rushed back to Rob North from Mallory Park, and without taking the engine out, had the head angle altered by 3 degrees. And interesting, that came back to bite us, because later on, I used to go to Elvington in Yorkshire to do the annual records. Percy came up on the bike to have a go, and subsequently did, I think, 165. But for world British records, you have to have the head of the barrel lead wired and lead sealed. And of course, I was all on tap now. The people all gathering round to see the head lifted, see what the inside, it'd be like now looking inside, a top Honda yard. And up it came on the studs, and then the fins hit the frame. It wouldn't come off. So Fred had to go and find a big dreadnought, a big rough bastard, and file the fins down till it was come off, which was great fun. So, of course, when Doug saw this frame, he realised, I don't know if any of you, Doug's designed the MC1, that was designed to be it was 250 overhead, double overhead car, single, can't remember. But 4-valve, 250 single, with Jeff Hughes to win the world title on. And it had a frame very much like that. That stopped when the BSI board asked the head of racing, can you guarantee he's going to win the title? He said, no, of course I bet he can't, so he just stopped the whole issue. But that had a frame very much like that, so Doug latched onto that straight away. And that was, did a lot of, created a lot of racing successes for us. And again,
Norman, can we stop at the buffet now?
well, they got started. Yes, no, I'm
Oh,
hungry.
you can carry on afterwards.
Right, how are we doing?
It's 9:15.
Is it? Okay, it's grub time. And beer time.